June 8, 1995, Pampa, Texas, 4:35 p.m. The atmosphere over the Panhandle detonates. In a single afternoon, 29 tornadoes tear across the plains. 3 of them are rated F4. One column of violently rotating air spins with winds exceeding 300 miles per hour, peeling thick asphalt from the roads and tossing 15,000-pound trucks like plastic toys. The physics of a storm this violent predict absolute carnage. Yet when the skies finally clear and the debris settles, the official death toll stands at 0. It wasn't sheer luck, it wasn't divine intervention. It was the absolute triumph of a warning system and the people who listened. The geography of the Texas Panhandle acts as a natural manufacturing plant for extreme weather. Situated in the heart of Tornado Alley, its flat, featureless plains provide a collision ground for opposing atmospheric forces. On the morning of June 8, 1995, warm, moisture-laden air surging north from the Gulf of Mexico collides violently with dense, cold air sweeping down from the Rocky Mountains. The resulting atmospheric instability is extreme. Meteorologists measure the fuel available to a developing thunderstorm using an index called Convective Available Potential Energy, or CAPE. Under typical conditions, a CAPE value of 1,000 joules per kilogram is enough to produce severe thunderstorms. On this Thursday afternoon, radar systems and weather balloons indicate that the CAPE over the Texas Panhandle has spiked past 5,000 joules per kilogram. To understand the physical reality of this number, consider the energy output of a standard commercial firecracker. If 1,000 joules represents the explosive force of that firecracker, the atmosphere over Texas that afternoon is packing the equivalent of shoving 5 full sticks of industrial dynamite into that same paper tube. The sky is not simply preparing to rain. The entire atmospheric column has transformed into a massive invisible powder keg. It requires only the smallest thermal trigger to ignite. In the history of natural disasters, the most profound tragedies often begin in ignorance, with populations wholly unaware of the mechanisms descending upon them. June 8th is different. Behind the glowing screens of the National Weather Service, meteorologists watch the volatile air masses converge. Recognizing the extreme atmospheric fuel building aloft, they issue widespread tornado watches hours before the first dark cloud materializes. On the ground in the town of Pampa, the physical environment begins to change. The afternoon heat becomes suffocating. The sky gradually shifts from a pale blue to a sickly greenish-gray tint. The barometric pressure drops, a subtle change that presses against the eardrums and tightens the chest. An unnatural stillness settles over the dry grass and the industrial parks along the western edge of town. Then, the mechanical wail of the city's early warning sirens cuts through the heavy air. Often, human psychology dictates hesitation. People step outside to look at the sky, or they assume it is a false alarm. They delay the crucial seconds needed for survival. But as the sirens echo across Pampa and neighboring counties, an entire population reacts. They secure their homes. They move to subterranean shelters. They crowd into windowless interior bathrooms. Instead of hesitating, they act. But they listen. The warning system functions exactly as designed, as the human preparation races against the ticking clock of the ignited dynamite above. While the residents of Pampa seek shelter, a fleet of instrument-laden vehicles drives in the opposite direction. They are part of Vortex 95, a massive meteorological experiment led by NOAA. Dr. Matt Biddle and his team are not evacuating. They are driving directly into the core of the storm to extract raw data. The atmosphere is not simply producing a single tornado. Doppler radar reveals a cyclic supercell. This is an atmospheric engine of relentless efficiency. It pulls in hot, moist air, twists it into a violent vortex, exhausts its energy, and then immediately rebuilds a new rotational core. It operates like a living, ruthless organism, devouring the terrain, resetting its stance, and striking again. Before the sun sets, this single supercell will spawn 29 separate tornadoes. Inside the mobile radar trucks, researchers stare at glowing green monitors. The radar signature forms a distinct, menacing curve known as a hook echo, the undisputed fingerprint of a major tornado. This hook echo is massive, and its trajectory is locked squarely onto the populated grids of the Texas Panhandle. The scientists measure the wind fields and record the pressure drops, tracking a phenomenon that has evolved far beyond a typical spring storm. They are watching the atmosphere attempt to erase everything in its path. On the rural outskirts of Pampa, Sheriff Randy Stubblefield parks his patrol cruiser. His visibility is reduced to a few yards. Baseball-sized hail, chunks of ice nearly 3 inches in diameter, hammers the steel roof of his vehicle with the staccato rhythm of machine gun fire. He remains in his position, observing the advancing black wall to relay real-time visual data back to dispatch. At 4:40 p.m., the city's early warning network activates in unison. The mechanical wail cuts through the low rumble of the approaching storm. In a town of 18,000 people, there is no chaotic stampede. Instead, there is absolute methodical compliance. Thousands of residents halt their daily routines. They descend into concrete storm cellars. They wedge themselves into interior closets and pull mattresses over their heads. The shelter-in-place protocols are executed flawlessly. This creates the most harrowing segment of the timeline, the waiting. Beneath the surface, entire families sit in the damp darkness. Above them, the sky turns the color of bruised iron. A towering wall of wind begins to shred the dry prairie grass, violently uprooting fence posts and pulling topsoil into the air. The vortex is no longer an abstract radar signature on a screen. It is a physical entity, carving a deep black trench toward the industrial complexes along Alcott Street. The countdown has reached 0. At precisely 5:15 p.m., the sky makes contact with the ground at the northwestern industrial edge of Pampa. This is not the typical wide funnel cloud often associated with prairie storms. Scientists and storm chasers describe the Pampa tornado as a drill bit or a solid black pencil piercing straight down from the clouds. This specific morphology is dictated by the law of conservation of angular momentum. Just as a figure skater spins faster by pulling their arms inward, an atmospheric vortex that tightens its radius drastically increases its rotational velocity. The core of the Pampa drill bit condenses into an incredibly narrow column, amplifying the internal wind speeds to terrifying levels. Based on photogrammetry of the debris, researchers later calculate that the wind rotating inside this narrow vortex exceeds 300 miles per hour, or roughly 480 kilometers per hour. This approaches the theoretical threshold of an F6 rating. When a force of this magnitude strikes an industrial park, structural integrity becomes irrelevant. Heavy machinery is torn apart. The storm lifts massive industrial dump trucks, vehicles weighing over 15,000 pounds, or more than 7 metric tons, and effortlessly carries them 100 feet, roughly 30 meters, into the air before slamming them back into the dirt. To comprehend the physical power required for this act, it is equivalent to picking up 3 adult elephants, throwing them over the roof of a 10-story building, and dropping them in free fall like discarded toys. The atmospheric engine is currently operating at maximum output, and it is grinding the western edge of Pampa into metallic dust. The industrial sector is chewed into scrap metal. Thick steel girders and torn machinery become lethal projectiles, transforming into what storm chasers call steel satellites, orbiting the violent core. The drill bit continues its forward progression, carving a path directly toward the most densely populated residential neighborhoods of Pampa. Thousands of people are huddled in basements and interior rooms. If a vortex carrying 300-mile-per-hour wind sweeps through blocks of wooden houses, the town will instantly become a mass grave. Then an anomaly in atmospheric physics occurs. Right at the boundary separating the pulverized industrial zone from the vulnerable residential grid, the drill bit suddenly loses its sharp focus. The very mechanism that makes a cyclic supercell so dangerous, its constant looping process of exhausting old tornadoes and building new ones, intervenes. The Pampa vortex rapidly weakens as the parent storm chokes off its inflow, transferring the rotational energy to a newly forming core miles away. For the families trapped underground, the experience is still a sensory nightmare. The deafening roar of the storm vibrates through the concrete foundations, applying immense pressure to the eardrums. Windows shatter above them, and the wooden frames of their houses violently shake and groan against the passing winds. In the pitch-black darkness of the cellars, the structural failure of their homes seems imminent. Yet, the total vaporization they feared never arrives. Their houses sustain severe damage, but the walls hold just enough. In the face of a storm capable of throwing 7-ton trucks, the fact that thousands of people remain safely buried underground is no coincidence. They were warned, but they listened. And that singular act of compliance allowed the atmospheric transition to happen without claiming a single life. While the town of Pampa is spared total annihilation at the last possible second, the parent supercell is far from exhausted. It reloads its internal mechanisms and targets the rural community of Kellerville. The tornado that descends here manifests in a completely different form. It is not a narrow drill bit. It is a massive wedge tornado, a sprawling wall of black rotation extending nearly a mile wide. Even though the sun has not yet set, the sky over Kellerville turns pitch black. The sensory texture of this impact is entirely different from Pampa. The air becomes choked with a heavy, distinct odor of pulverized dirt, shredded pine wood, and scorched asphalt, as the sheer friction of the vortex peels the paved surfaces directly off the roads. The sound is no longer a localized roar. Witnesses describe the noise not as wind, but as the overwhelming, mechanical thrust of a dozen Boeing 747 jet engines roaring simultaneously inside a closed room. The Wedge tornado delivers an absolute climax of destruction when it strikes an isolated wooden farmhouse. The storm does not merely collapse the structure or scatter its debris. It executes a literal erasure. The extreme winds act as an atmospheric sandblaster, sweeping the property so thoroughly that the concrete foundation is left completely bare. There are no walls, no broken furniture, and no sheared plumbing pipes left behind. The house is completely vaporized from the surface of the earth. When survey crews later inspect the damage path, they initially fail to record the destroyed home, because there is no visual evidence that a structure had ever existed there in the first place. While the primary tornado dissolves, the atmospheric engine immediately spawns another massive wedge near the town of Allison, crossing Route 60. The Vortex 95 team is in relentless pursuit. To capture the necessary scientific data, they must execute a highly dangerous tactic known as a hook-slice maneuver. This involves driving their instrumented vehicles deliberately through the storm's blinding rain curtain to emerge directly behind the rotating core. The maneuver plunges the convoy into complete darkness. Rain and hail hammer the windshields, reducing visibility to zero. The vehicles shake violently under the sheer pressure of the crosswinds. Then they break through the precipitation shaft and enter the clear slot. What they witness defies conventional meteorological models. The primary funnel is massive and violent, but the terrifying phenomena are occurring along its periphery. Immense horizontal vortices detach from the main circulation. These are fast-spinning tubes of wind rotating parallel to the ground before violently snapping downward. Dr. Matt Biddle later describes the chaotic structure as an angry octopus. Massive, dark tentacles of condensation whip erratically from the main funnel, striking the earth with explosive force. The physics of the storm have degraded into pure uncontained turbulence. The Vortex team continues to record data as the storm rips across the unpopulated plains, tearing deep trenches into the soil. They are documenting a storm operating at the absolute limit of atmospheric capability. The angry octopus eventually chokes on its own cold outflow and dissipates into the twilight, leaving behind a profound, unsettling silence across the panhandle. The following morning, the sun rises over a physically altered landscape. From the air, a massive scar stretches for 30 miles, or roughly 48 kilometers, across the Texas panhandle. The physical damage is staggering. The storm caused $30 million in destruction. Entire industrial parks have been reduced to twisted steel frames. Massive storage tanks lie crushed, utility grids are severed, and rural properties like the Kellerville farmhouse have been completely erased from the map. Emergency response teams deploy across the affected counties at first light. Given the visual magnitude of the destruction, they carry hundreds of body bags, mentally preparing to excavate a mass casualty event. They search the basements of Pampa and the scoured foundations of the rural plains. As the hours pass, the reports filter back to the command centers. The numbers are processed, verified, and confirmed. Total injuries requiring hospitalization, 7. Total fatalities, 0. The result is statistically incomprehensible. Tornado researcher Thomas Grazoulis, after analyzing the footage and the structural failures, famously concludes, "If there ever was a potential F6 caught on camera, it was the Pampa, Texas tornado of 1995. The Panhandle had absorbed a direct hit from a storm that bordered on theoretical limits. Yet nobody died. The absence of bodies is not a clerical error, nor is it a stroke of divine luck. It is the direct mathematical result of a functional society. The National Weather Service tracked the threat. The sirens wailed. The people did not hesitate. They abandoned their property and went underground. The system worked." To truly understand the anomaly of June 8, 1995, we must look at the physical metrics. The Texas Panhandle absorbed 29 tornadoes in a matter of hours. 3 were classified as violent F4s. The Pampa drill bit possessed rotational wind speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour, generating enough lift to casually throw 15,000-pound steel vehicles across the prairie. By every law of atmospheric physics, the town should have been a graveyard. The fact that the death toll remained at absolute zero was the result of 3 intersecting factors. First, the National Weather Service recognized the extreme Cape values early in the morning, issuing widespread tornado watches long before the first clouds gathered. Second, the relatively low population density of the Panhandle provided a buffer zone. But the third and most critical factor was human discipline. The early warning sirens in Pampa were not ignored. The citizens did not walk outside to film the sky. They executed their shelter-in-place protocols immediately and unconditionally. The sight of 0 fatalities against the most violent tornado outbreak in Texas history is not a random miracle of God. It is the greatest epic of human preparation and a flawlessly functioning warning system. Nature played its most devastating card. It unleashed enough kinetic energy to vaporize concrete and steel. But they listened, and the system worked. The tragedy of natural disasters is that we often forget the lessons of survival. In April of 2026, Texas was struck by another relentless outbreak of tornadoes. Despite modern radar and smartphone alerts, people lost their lives. The atmosphere does not care whether you are standing in the year 1995 or 2026. The physics of a tornadic vortex remain unchanged, and your survival depends entirely on your adherence to 5 critical rules. First, know the difference between a watch and a warning. A watch means conditions are favorable, but a warning means a tornado is actively rotating. Second, always seek the lowest possible windowless interior room. Third, protect your head and neck from flying projectiles, even if it means pulling a mattress over yourself. Fourth, never attempt to outrun a tornado in a vehicle. You will easily become a steel satellite. And fifth, when the sirens wail, act immediately. If you made it this far, I appreciate you being here. These videos take a lot of time to put together. The Pampa tornado of 1995 is not just a historical document for weather enthusiasts. It is a survival manual written in the debris of shattered homes. Please consider sharing this with your loved ones, especially those living in storm-prone regions. Because when the atmosphere finally detonates over your city, you cannot rely on divine intervention. Your preparation today is the miracle of tomorrow. Until next time, stay safe and stay prepared.